Word Balloon. Word Balloon is brought to you by the League of Word Balloon Listeners.
I was such a fan of the Legion of Superheroes when I was a kid that I always wanted to work with this version of the characters that was designed back in the 1970s. They all had kind of sexier looking costumes that provided almost bikini-like effects for a lot of the characters, both for the men and the women. And there was a sense of the liberation of the age in the 70s. Long hair came into vogue, and there was a lot of feathered hair in some of the cases for the women, and it was designed by one of my favorite costume designers, the legendary Dave Cockrum, who designed the modern X-Men as well as the original Guardians of the Galaxy. And he did this first. He gave all these redesigns to every character. So when I got to create this single painting, I had no gig that had demanded it. It wasn't a deal I had made with anybody, so I started on the piece of art, worked on it for off and on through a year, pitched it to get it made into a print, which it luckily got accepted because it otherwise is a version of the characters that was no longer standing. This was sort of my love letter to the artists that defined that era and characters that really impacted me when I was a young child.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room a selling machine.
Welcome back, everybody. It's time again for a Kinescope. John Sutras here, Gabe Hardman here, Jeff Parker here, Ian Brill here, and a really interesting program that we're looking at tonight, guys. You could call it maybe the first reality show, but not really. And that's Person to Person, featuring this man, one of my true broadcast idols, Edward R. Murrow.
Yeah, I mean, it's more like the first celebrity interview show. I mean, I suppose that you could say it's like a reality show in that it's kind of scripted and kind of, rehearsed already. And so, that very much like the illegitimacy of current reality shows, but it did pioneer the sort of celebrity interview and, I don't know if, John, you want to cover just who Murrow was and set all that stuff up.
Certainly. Edward R. Murrow started his career in radio and was a very important news correspondent and anchor for CBS. Started in the late 30s when war broke out in Europe. He and Bill Shriver were the two main correspondents. And essentially, Murrow cultivated the group of World War II correspondents that covered the war extensively. People like Charles Collingwood and Howard K. Smith were among the reporters. When he came back to the States, he was a very important part of CBS broadcasting. They wanted him immediately to be involved not just in the news division, but the entertainment division, because during World War II, he really brought you a first-person look at what was going on. He went up in bomber planes during World War II, reported from the rooftops of London during the Nazi Blitz and the bombing of London, and he wasn't afraid to literally be on the front lines that way and report the news. Person to Person, he had two shows. See It Now, which was his news magazine show, kind of a precursor to 60 Minutes. And then he had this entertainment show, Person to Person. And Person to Person was, as you say, a celebrity interview show. They would wire people's homes and go into these homes. And Murrow sat very comfortably in New York, chain smoking as he was always seen, while the people would be there. He is with cigarette in hand, and that house shot. I don't know specifically what house that was, but that's essentially how each interview would start. He would usually do two interviews per half hour, one of a newsworthy person and one with a celebrity. and we wanted to talk about several of his celebrity interviews because those are the most interesting, and also the ironic private lives, despite the display that was presented to the Murrow person-to-person audience with the live cameras. As Gabe said, it was a scripted show to a degree, but also
rehearsed. Yeah, rehearsed. I mean, it was sort of planned out, not strictly scripted, but yeah.
Yeah.
But I think it's worth saying that See It Now, the show that Murrow did, and it had been Hear It Now on the radio, I believe, right? And
right.
And
the new show,
the new show was what he was proud of. It's what what he's most famous, at least I guess most famous for now, is the standing up to Joe McCarthy and the and doing the doing the program on him, which kind of led in part led to his downfall. Certainly led to the changing public opinion about his tactics, his kind of anti-communist, red baiting, turning on every American tactics.
Well, and also the sponsors were gun shy of sponsoring See It Now because they didn't want to piss off half the country. I mean, there were issues that Murrow was not afraid to tackle, including smoking and things like that.
But up until that point, they had autonomy. They did not. There was no one, including CBS, who could tell them exactly what to do. So but the all of the like his most triumphant moment with McCarthy was also a little bit of his downfall.
Absolutely,
he started to to kind of he lost some of that he just lost some of the momentum that he had prior to that, and and they also encroached on what they could do on the show more after that.
And they buried the show. The show went from being a primetime show, See It Now, to a Sunday afternoon show, which, as we all know, people are out doing their thing on Sundays, not watching TV. But no, you're right. I mean, the communist witch hunt was very polarizing. There were people that are like, hey, we got to stamp them out, and then there were people that agreed with Murrow, where it's like, no, it's a witch hunt. And, and that was very divisive. William Paley became very close to Murrow, especially during the war years, the chairman of CBS. He is the one who gave Murrow that initial autonomy. But as you say, it was during that Murrow or the McCarthy period where Paley started to doubt himself in giving Murrow that power. And Frank Stanton, who was the president of CBS, disagreed with it and even encroached person to person during the quiz show scandals, which we covered in an earlier episode, accused person to person of using the same kind of pre-scheduled tactics. And Murrow's defense was, we couldn't put cameras in someone's home if we didn't have the opportunity to tell them, this is what we're going to talk about, this is how we want to present you, and found the comparison ludicrous.
But
also, I mean, no one's winning money on this show. Everyone already has a bunch of money.
That is true. Yeah. But Stanton was seen by Murrow as the villain. Paley was the guy who's in theory on his side, but in reality, Paley had turned against him as well and was really just operating through Stanton. And and so ultimately, after CBS had kind of forced on them airtime for rebuttals from from people who who felt attacked by by episodes that of See It Now that they'd done. The final straw was they did an episode about the potential statehood of Alaska and Hawaii, and this kind of crackpot racist Southern congressman who was not an important guy at all, right? They ended up giving him time, like equal time on the show, to argue against statehood for Hawaii and Alaska, basically saying that Hawaii is run by communists because the Maritime Union had a strong, presence in Hawaii, right, for obvious reasons, right? And this guy, even by general standards, this guy was just kind of a nothing congressman, and he hated it that some brown people would be would get into the union, right?
Abject to brown people encroaching in our fine white nation.
Exactly. He's he's like he's the senator from Mr. Show. Senator Tankerbell. Anyways, so that's but all that's to say that stuff, as important as that stuff was not really what made Murrow popular in the 50s. It was this person-to-person show. This is what he was really known for, and this is what what got the ratings. It also was what made him a wealthy man, because he had co-ownership in the show.
Also,
during that, go ahead, Ian. Excuse me.
You brought up time slots, John. One thing that's was kind of amazing about the history of person to person is this show was so popular. And do you guys know what its time slot was?
No.
Fridays at 10:30. Can you imagine something Friday at 10:30? All of America. Well, I can't imagine all of America being in front of their TV at that time. But
look, this is, everything we talk about is a world where TV is new and exciting and, and novel. I got a new iPad and all of a sudden, and I'm like, start reading comics on it. And I'm like, oh, comics are exciting because of this new iPad. Imagine that, if this entire new invention and everybody is, fascinated with it. It seems reasonable. And also I imagine, the kids were out doing whatever they do anyway, but on Friday night. But do you want to go into talking about some of the specifics of these? We're not looking at any one whole show of this thing. We're just looking at individual segments. There aren't really whole shows out there. There are kind of 15-minute segments that are pretty much all available on YouTube, or at least the ones we're talking about. Even though there's some like the Fidel Castro one, I would have loved to see, but couldn't find anywhere.
No,
it can't be found.
Jeff, any thoughts on the show, or?
Okay, yeah. So Jeff, what did you get a chance to watch, and what did you think?
I watched the Martin and Lewis one. I watched the Bing Crosby. I watched Sammy Davis Jr. and Groucho. And it was weird how the Bing Crosby one just really skeeved me out. Mm-hmm. And you would think, I grew up around plenty of wasps, obviously, from the South. But it was so rich waspy. I don't know what it was. It just hurt. And luckily, I had the Groucho one on after that. And I was like, oh, I love Groucho.
Exactly. Thank God. Yeah. Like, I honestly just thank God for that Groucho one, because like I kind of loved that one, and it felt like watching human beings.
Yeah, it's like, oh, here's somebody who loves this child. And that cat on the billiard table.
Oh, my God.
Was so great. The way he even hit the thing with the cue ball and it wouldn't move.
It didn't care. Like he's just picking it up and like throwing it around. And
I was like, this is the exact same stuff that people love on the internet now. That's Gabe's dog. Yep. And
you heard us talking about that cat.
Exactly.
Yeah, sorry, I was talking about the cat.
Don't worry about it, Gabe. It's cool.
Yeah. The cat was so great. And then but you could see the way Groucho felt the need to. He only feels comfortable. He paces a lot, and he feels most comfortable when he still can kind of go into a routine and start entertaining. It's just like, I can't just talk. That's not a thing. But have to do a routine.
Okay, sorry. The great thing about the Groucho one, though, is that he keeps it moving. He's like,
he really does.
I got to be entertaining people. I got to, stuff has to happen. My kid's gonna sing. I'm gonna play the guitar. We're gonna go look at this other thing. We're gonna go outside, and we're gonna, and I'm gonna tell people how to compost.
Real TV guy here.
Yeah,
so he knows how to keep it going.
Yeah, absolutely. It was fun, and you got kind of a sense of him. Obviously he's Groucho. I don't think anybody gets a sense of who this guy exactly was, because his persona is so overwhelming.
Well, I think that's the case with several of the guests that we looked at in particular, that we saw the facade. We didn't see the real person.
Sure.
Regarding Groucho and Melinda, here's a picture of them on You Bet Your Life. And this that interview was in the midst of Groucho's successful TV run, which was kind of a comeback for Groucho. He, those last couple Marx Brothers movies didn't do very well. And he was kind of at a loss until starting to do the You Bet Your Life show on the radio, and then subsequently on television.
Right. Yeah.
Again, as he said about Murrow, he owned a piece of the show and got very wealthy from You Bet Your Life. What were you going to say again?
Oh, just that it's a reinvention. Like it's him, becoming something else. And
it was still a different medium persona, but the game show afforded him the forum
Yeah. Not that the Groucho persona was any different, because I don't think that
No.
ever changed. But
No.
just that that going into TV like that. I mean, doing a television game show was not an option before he did it.
Yeah.
So.
But I wanted to point out the relationship between him and Melinda, which of course we caught at her very adorable young self, 7 years old, on the Murrow broadcast. Man, that was a really weirdly backstage dad-daughter relationship, really kind of forcing her into show business. There's a great 60s Hollywood Palace episode where Melinda is like 20 something and they're singing a duet. Also a You Bet Your Life, where Melinda and a very young Candice Bergen, Brown, Edgar Bergen's daughter, because they were friends. They are singing a trio with Groucho and stuff. And it's Melinda really by the 70s left the spotlight and is still alive and very much a very private person these days. And
yeah, I did watch the Hollywood Palace with her singing her hit song "The East Side of Town," which sounds exactly like that song "Downtown." So it's like it's a knockoff of it or something, or like the generic version of it.
If you're a Marx, you're gonna be out there. Sorry, you're a Marx.
Yeah,
just like if you're a Howard, you're gonna be a stooge.
And but Miriam was another daughter, and maybe she was married at this point or whatever. But I found her conspicuously absent and also not part of the spotlight. And Miriam not as attractive as Melinda was as a little girl or even as a young woman. And I wonder if they, all right, that's fine. Why don't you stay backstage? That'll be all right. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know anything about that. But but I did think it was funny that Melinda starred with that Groucho and Melinda starred together in a TV version of The Mikado, which like I could only find like 2 minutes of like on YouTube, but it just, I mean, that sounds like a train wreck. It's certainly something that I would be interested in seeing.
But Groucho adored Gilbert and Sullivan and appreciated the rhythm of the lyrics and the songs.
Sure.
And really did enjoy. I am sure that's why that Mikado production was created, because the TV people knew how much Groucho loved Gilbert and Sullivan.
Right. And it also, another thing to go to for your Groucho and Melinda entertainment is the 1967 episode of The Dating Game, where inexplicably the father-daughter episode of The Dating Game, which sounds quite unpleasant going in, but it turns out that it's Groucho sitting there asking questions as her father of the potential suitors, which
yikes.
Not good, right?
I
mean, mainly because Groucho is playing off these three schmoes who think they can be funny, right? Which is the worst thing in the world. If they just played it straight and let Groucho be funny, then that would be fine.
Well,
they try to say funny things. They try to, they try to. And at one point, he just turns and goes, "Can we edit this?" Groucho does. So it's not good stuff, but it's
is that on YouTube?
Stuff. Oh yeah, it's on YouTube.
Oh, I gotta find that. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
For anyone who's not seen Person to Person, there is a weird, I think, kind of forced quality to a lot of these, and you really feel it with anything involving families, kids, celebrities have. So, I mean, Jeff mentioned Martin and Lewis. They're separate. This is after they broke up. Jerry Lewis is with his kids. Dean Martin is with his kids. Bing Crosby is with one of his sons. And you, even if you don't know that history of how bad things got, that I don't know. I felt there was an uneasiness, and maybe people who don't know aren't as disturbed, but I felt there was uneasiness. And Sammy Davis Jr. is with his dad and later grandma, so he's with his
and uncle, right?
And well, Will Baxter, I don't know what was his biological.
I don't know. He introduces him as his uncle, right? Like, I mean,
he was his uncle and manager.
Sammy Sr. and Will were partners, and obviously Sammy was brought in the acting at an incredibly young age, and so that family friend that's considered an uncle. Will Maxton, definitely. Yeah. No, you're right about that. And I agree. And I think also, I just think the uncomfortability of children being on TV and just, kind of, okay. I
Well,
don't know.
children and all the civilians who have to be on there, right? Like they just look like, like, oh, I'm excited and maybe I'm going to drop dead, like it's I mean, it's scary, especially, back then they'd never been out over the coaxial cable before. They don't know how this works.
It's a new thing.
And
now is what they did, and it was totally new and totally experimental.
Yeah.
So Ian, were you watching the separate Martin and Lewis, or I just watched the 54
was
Martin
one
and
with
Lewis.
them together? No, I watched one with them apart with their family.
I watched all three.
I watched both. I watched the one where they're together, and then I watched separate ones where with one with Jerry Lewis and one with Dean Martin. The first one with the both of them is more like they're playing the comedy duo. There are moments where Jerry is like, well, I do think it's the time to get serious and talk about blah blah.
Right.
But but the ones where they're apart are very much even though I don't believe that Jerry ever mentions Dean, but Dean does. Does he?
There's a brief one where they're like in his study where he has like books, like transcripts of everything he's done, and he mentions Martin.
Oh, that's right. I love that part.
True.
Okay, look, I'm sorry. We're going to talk about the Jerry Lewis one right now.
Folks, look up the Jerry Lewis one alone. It's nuts.
Yeah, the single Jerry Lewis one is like solo Jerry Lewis. Like, so he goes into a library. Like, the way this works is they've set up cameras throughout the house. And people walk, the celebrity kind of walks from room to room, and the camera catches them as they come in. And when you come into this room, and it's like this sort of vast library, and I'm like, oh, that looks cool. That looks nice. It's like, he's got this big, awesome library. He goes around, starts pointing at everything, and they're just things about himself, right? Like everything on the shelf is something that is just cataloging his career. And, it's this, it's a shrine to himself. Then he goes around and, he points out awards that he's gotten, an award from the state of Israel, award from this, award from that, right? And then at one point, I know I may be exaggerating a little bit, but he basically says that he's the chosen one, right? Like that if that I more or less says that like it like, oh well, whatever God is out there, whatever he says that that chooses people. I was chosen, and it's just so the megalomania is pretty amazing. Very Jerry Lewis, but pretty amazing. So I don't know if he's gonna.
He can control his walls apparently.
Oh
yeah, he had remote controls too.
Oh right, yes,
yeah.
right,
yes.
Right.
That's a big okay. That's one of the things that interests me the most. Is it's rarely said explicitly on this show, but this show is really about the new wealth that people going into the 50s experience. I will say it is touched upon the most in the Liberace episode, which is quite a segment. And that's just his whole family, his brother, his infamous brother George, his sister, who has the same face as him, and his mom are all in there. But he talks about being in the Depression, and how even though his dad was a musician, his dad didn't want him to be a musician because things were so dire at the time. And then going into World War II, that generation who lived through both of those things are now the celebrities, at least, who are in this new wealth strata, are buying these big houses that they couldn't even imagine 30 years ago in places in it's just funny, like places like hearing Edward R. Murrow say Sherman Oaks, and like
yes.
like a
or
serious,
Humbly Hills, which is the just south of Bel Air part of over in Beverly Hills type area. But yeah, it is really interesting to see these houses and see these kind of mid-century houses that are
Jerry Lewis said Louis B. Maris' old house.
Yes, right.
And it's
I mean,
gigantic. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And
Now, just imagine that Margaret Keane painting of him and his
oh
family.
my God, yes.
I just texted it to
Oh
John
my
just in case he
God.
hadn't seen it in a while.
Oh, I forgot about that. Yeah, so
Is it?
this segment must have predated the Margaret Keane painting because he
It's
goes
the
around and shows
creepiest
off
painting
other
about-
ones.
Yeah, because Margaret Keane really broke big in the early '60s, and
yeah.
I think. And
Yeah, well, this one, the solo Jerry one is 58. So, that's, but when he goes in and they introduce the family, I mean, I think that is, even though I think that what we know about Bing's family is more disturbing, what we see on camera with Jerry's family is not pleasant, right? Like, I mean, to me, I found it very cringy and very, like, especially the part where they get around to Gary Lewis, later of Gary Lewis and the Playboys,
Right.
where Ed Murrow is like, kind of focuses in on Gary for a minute, and then, who starts going into a, I do some of Dad's routines, like the whatever, the laughing guy, and then he just goes
The sad guy.
or whatever the fuck it was. Like, it was just, it was so embarrassing and so bad. And this kid, look, he's still alive. He's out there. Oh, the fucking painting, yes. That's him on the right with the cat. Just the cringiness of this obviously untalented son. And I'm sorry if Gary Lewis.
Diamond Ring's a good song.
Yeah,
it doesn't shine just for anybody.
Yeah, it's so, yeah. I mean, but then, he went on to do Gary Lewis and the Playboys. He was not, he couldn't sing, but they put him out front. They, I believe that even he only ever basically went around like lip syncing the studio recordings of it, and and at that, he's not really singing on those tracks. There's like another singer on there, and he's just sort of overdubbed on top of them.
Oh, is that true? I didn't know that.
That's what my research tells me. Because I got fascinated with Gary Lewis and the Playboys, as I will, 60s pop garbagey stuff. I love that, and then he went, they had some, they had some hits,
yes, they did,
and
this Diamond Ring, Count Me In, sure,
yep.
Those are decent 60s pop songs, sure.
Yeah. Everybody Loves a Clown.
Everybody Loves a Clown. Yeah.
Oh my God. But like I watched another Hollywood Palace with Jerry and introducing Gary, right? And they do a little double act thing, and I'm not a Jerry Lewis fan, right? Like, I'm just not, but like Gary's incredible lack of timing in the in their interactions with each other was something to behold, right? And then he goes off, and it's like, it's as if he's proving himself as a musician, but like they're just singing to this, they're lip syncing it. So
I've seen a Sullivan where Gary and the Playboys rifle through their hits, a medley, and at the end, Ed says, Gary's off to join the service. It'll be in Vietnam. So let's all wish him good luck on his endeavors of crushing the Viet Cong. All right, let's hear it.
So he did go off to Vietnam, and he was, and this was just obviously right on the heels of the success of Gary Lewis and the Playboys. Went off to Vietnam, served for like 2 years or whatever it was, came back, and basically everybody was like, oh, that shit you did before, we don't care about that anymore. We like Janis Joplin and all this stuff, right? And then and apparently he tried to form a new band called Medicine with one of the former Cowsills, but apparently it was not successful. Less, I don't want to surprise anybody, but it wasn't successful.
Well, I have a quote here from Gary about his father.
Yeah, go ahead.
In Gary's life. This is from Jerry, the personal life section of Jerry Lewis's Wikipedia. His eldest son, Gary, publicly called his father a mean and evil person and said that Lewis never showed him or his siblings any love or care.
I believe it.
Yeah.
Oh,
He and Bing Crosby were in a tight race for who could just be mean as shit to
And
their
Bing
kids.
Crosby almost admits, I mean, kind of does admit to how brutal he could be. Like he says a weird quote about like, oh, sometimes I smack them into the corner and then they go and smack me into a corner. I'm like, they're your fucking kids. They're half the size of you. And why are you talking about raising children like it's a boxing match anyway? It's so
Yeah.
staged, but that tension between what's not being said. I mean, I should say not all the persons are like this, um, but some of them are. It's weird.
well, and
If you watch the Lewis and Clark one where they're together, I
Right.
mean, and they're not doing their act. They're sort of doing it a little bit. They go into it. They do their old shtick a little bit just to make everybody feel comfortable. But then at other parts, they're trying to more be themselves. Jerry is just extremely uncomfortable to watch because he's manic and he doesn't know how to behave to humans. And Dean is like watching a Valium happen to your. It's like, oh, let me just please get the camera back on Dean for a second. He's so relaxing and is comfortable, and that's the way I remember. Like when they were trying to do an A&E bio on them before they did bigger biographies or whatever, they could find two people to talk about Jerry Lewis at any given time. There were tons of they had to cut out all the people who wanted to talk about Dean.
Yeah.
You know, it's one of my
I-
favorite things on Twitter is always to try to rope Sean Levy into talking about Jerry Lewis because I know he's going to go on a rant if I do it. And every now and then I pull it off. I'll just get him right on I can see him floating around the subject, and I'll throw in like that Margaret Keane painting or something.
You wrote the book on Jerry Lewis, right?
Yeah.
I have
and
that
he
book.
wrote one about the Rat Pack as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I was going to say, first of all, I don't know if they're rerunning it since Thanksgiving, but Turner Classic Movies at the end of November showed this amazing Dean Martin documentary called Dean Martin, King of Cool. That is absolutely must-watching if you're at all a Dean Martin fan. And I know Ian and all of us have been also listening to Katrina Longworth's You Must Remember This podcast.
Yeah.
And they are just wrapping up their look at Dean Martin and Sammy Davis, from the start of their careers to the end of their lives. And yeah, again, another weird family dynamic is Dean's kids. Dean, like Bing, had a couple kids with the first marriage, divorced his wife, went to Jeannie Martin, who we see in the Dean person-to-person solo interview, and we see the kids. Of course, Dean Paul is featured there with the guitar, and they can't coax him to play. But of course, once he became a very young teenager, like 13 years old, he also, like Gary Lewis, found success in the pop charts with Dino, Desi, and Billy. Desi being Desi Arnaz Jr. I forget who Billy's famous parents were. But
I can't remember if he had a famous parent or not. But this is also this is a podcast tie-in with the TCM podcast about Lucy and Desi that's going on right now.
That's right.
I mean,
timely for once.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, no, everyone's talking about these families and stuff, and it is sad because I think you really don't get a sense of it on Dean's side. However, one of Jerry's kids shows up in the Dean documentary and talks about how much when Dean would visit Jerry's family, how much the son really wished Dean was his father. And also because the families would interact, the kids would all interact, and when things were cool between the Lewises and the Martins. And it just seemed like from the outside that Lewis's son felt that Dean was much more loving to his kids than Jerry was.
Well, and certainly they made a point on the You Must Remember This podcast about how, obviously, Dean was away a lot. Dean was a womanizer or whatever. But when he was home, he was very much like an engaged dad and would make him breakfast and do stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, I did find that interview with the solo Dean interview a little bit like, it's so clunky and it's so like it was a little hard to get through almost,
But it was cool that
you know.
he acknowledged that when Murrow asked him and said, "What was the biggest break you ever had?" and he said, "Meeting Jerry."
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it really
Yeah,
was
and
very
that's
matter of fact about it. And this
yeah,
was right after the break. And in fact, he kind of briefly promotes the Young Lions movie, which was his second movie after the breakup. He made a movie called 10,000 Bedrooms that was a massive bomb.
right.
But luckily, he got cast in the Young Lions with Marlon Brando and Montgomery Clift.
Right.
And as the three of us know, that was a huge break. And I love, and again, it is hard to get to the personal side of Dean Martin, but from both Katrina's podcast docuseries about it and the documentary movie, how like Dean and Montgomery Clift became really good friends, which is pretty cool because Montgomery Clift was a gay gentleman, and again, this was kind of during the taboo period of the gay lifestyle.
He struggled with this a lot, and there's a lot of self-hatred and stuff. And it is interesting that they were close friends, because you certainly wouldn't think that from the kind of cliched idea of who.
Absolutely,
is,
the macho cool guy that Dean always projected, and also. This is right after Montgomery Clift had that horrible car accident and needed reconstructive surgery. And unfortunately, it really had trouble like getting around the sets. And apparently Dean Martin would literally pick him up and carry him from set to set.
Yeah, I just watched
that kind of closeness, and it's like, that's amazing,
Yeah, I just watched the Young Lions for this, and it's Montgomery Clift is very frail looking in that movie, and the movie itself. Dean is good in it. It's basically, the idea is basically that it's his first dramatic role,
right.
and they the other actors kind of helped him through it, but he's good in it. His role is pretty limited, but he's good in it. The movie itself, based on a bestseller, it's a big shaggy kind of 3-hour thing that doesn't really work great as a movie, with Marlon Brando as an ambivalent Nazi. But like it's it's not the greatest movie, but like it certainly clearly was good for his career, and he is still playing kind of a quasi Dean Martin character. He's a show business guy who's drafted and in World War II, but
But it was the start of some very significant movies of his career, and you can't. Again, Katrina, I think, does a good job of going over that all the various movies. And really, Young Lions. I think I always get Rio Bravo and Rio Lobo confused.
No, it's Rio Bravo. Rio Bravo is the 50s one. Lobo is the 1970 or whatever. Yeah. Which I think is just like the third remake of that same story that 100% that Howard Hawks had done.
Absolutely.
But Rio Bravo is a great movie. He's great in it. Yeah. There's actually several things that he's great in, and I really like Dean Martin. Some Came Running. The
Sons of Katie Elder.
Yeah.
Sons of Katie Elder, sure.
Which
actually several really good Westerns. And even the not so good, he loved doing them. And I think he tried in those, like 5-Card Stud with Mitchum and Bandolero with Jemmy Stewart. He's my brother, for God's sake. So
and actually one of the movies that that is super underrated, a Billy Wilder movie called Kiss Me Stupid that he's in with Kim Novak, that I think is pretty great.
That's interesting because I haven't seen it, and Longworth really not a big fan of Kiss Me Stupid.
Yeah, well, I don't agree with her about a lot of movies, right? But but I really enjoy her show. I think it's also really interesting to hear her point of view on those movies.
Absolutely, and I agree. I sometimes don't agree with her as well.
But no, I think that Kiss Me Stupid is like a really interesting, underrated movie. A very subversive movie for the time, the kind of stuff that they're talking about. And, I'm on board with it being an interesting movie, even if it's certainly not perfect. It's too long. It's a little messy. It's, and it's a movie where Peter Sellers was initially the star of it, and he got fired after a week or something. And Ray Walston was brought in, but
wow.
It does feel like it would be a very different movie if Peter Sellers was the star of it. But I also think Ray Walston is great, and I think it's a really interesting movie. I'm going to defend that movie, but
you made me think that you're talking about Yeah. But the about the car accident, Murrow goes into that to bring it back to Murrow. You know, he brings that up with Sammy Davis Jr. in his
Yeah.
segment. He's like, "Tell us about that car accident, Sammy." And Sammy's like, "That's the best thing that ever happened to me." Like, what? You lost your eye?
Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
But Sammy is so showbiz. But in a way, like Sammy has this way of being showbiz and genuine at the same time. Like
Yeah.
it feels like he's a real guy, in his interview, while still framing it in a very showbizy way of like, no, of course you can ask me about the car accident. I'm here to talk about anything. And blah, 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 and,
He literally was just like raised in show business. Like that's the only
Yeah.
like
Yes,
Yeah, that's all he
Yes.
knows.
Yeah. But I'm saying he
Literally.
doesn't come off like a stilted weirdo show business robot. He comes off like a human being,
Yeah.
but who is
Yeah.
also a very show businessy guy.
Yeah, he's not Jim Carrey. Like,
Yeah.
he's not up there just like, doesn't know how to be normal. But he just makes it work no matter what. And
Yeah. I like, I'm sure this is partly because it was in black and white and the kinescope and all that sort of stuff, but I love the part where he goes to his closet and he pulls out a jacket and he's like, okay, so everybody expects me to dress like this, like a show businessy sort of thing. You see the cut of this jacket? And
but I like this Brooks Brothers jacket.
He takes out the second one. He's like, but what I really like to wear is this Brooks Brothers style Madison Avenue type jacket. And it's like, it's the same fucking jacket. Like, I can't tell the difference between these jackets. Like,
Yeah, it was pretty important to Sammy, though. He had to make a point of it. And then it's like, I also like single action pistols. And it goes over,
Yes.
which I keep in a low drawer down by the floor. And
but actually how it was set up was, and mind you, we're showing the big fancy house in the Hollywood Hills of this, African-American celebrity who is, he's not an activist of any kind, but he's,
yeah,
I'm sure that he had a lot of enemies, right? And and Ed is like, so do you collect anything, Sammy? He's like, yeah, I collect guns. And like it's kind of like maybe don't try approaching Sammy's house,
he does, he does know how to like twirl him. Like
he was really good at it.
Yeah.
He was
yeah.
I was going to say, because he's on a Rifleman episode within this era, and very proud of his gun prowess in terms of being able to twirl a gun and everything. And he really. It's a shame. I mean, again, from the Longworth show, I think she does adequate research where he really wanted to do a lot of things that black actors were just not allowed to do back then.
Yeah,
and it's really a shame because the guy was so ridiculously talented. I mean,
There was nothing
incredible mimic, obviously a beautiful voice, incredible dancer. I think was capable of decent dramatic acting. A Man Called Adam, was that the movie, Gabe, that he made with Louis Armstrong and Ossie Davis and everybody? I think it's called A Man Called Adam.
I don't know.
I saw it on Turner last year, and they talk about it in the Katrina series.
John, did you notice when he talks about the imitations, who inspired him with that?
I forget. Tell me.
Larry Storch,
Larry
friend.
Storch. How can you not remember that part?
That's the part I woke up and wait. Say more about Larry Storch, sir.
Definitely. That's I'll be honest, guys. I wasn't able. Was it on archive.org? I couldn't find it.
Oh, okay, yeah, that
Samuel.
yes. You know what? It was actually on YouTube, but the problem was it was there's I think they're rips of the DVDs that are just so it's unclear who's in each of them. There's like 3 volumes of it, and you have to go in and look through it to find the one with him, right?
Yeah.
So
Ian
I meant to production wise here, I meant to forward that information to you guys, but
no worries, man. I mean, I was grabbing other images, like here's Marilyn being interviewed on Person to Person, and that's a great interview itself. And again, I mean, that's the thing, and truly, that's why like the core of these people that I wanted to talk about, and I'm glad that Ian wanted to also talk about Dean and Sammy. But I mean, these are just we got the facades, but I think Marilyn, sadly, you could kind of still see how troubled she was in that interview. And I've seen it before. I remember it from watching it years ago. And yeah, I mean, it's just that's the thing again. Trying to present this happy life magazine front. I mean, that's the thing. Person to Person in its own way was almost like the video life magazine.
Yeah.
One of the things that I kept, I don't know if this is, it's just that kept intriguing me is, okay, like every episode starts with like a long shot of the house, and
Right.
that's not live. I assume that's just like a photo. But how is it framed? It's framed with curtains and sometimes like through a window. So like it's like you're Jerry Lewis's neighbor, and it has this keeping up with the Joneses feel. Like it's almost like establishing that sense of suburban competitiveness right there. And I just kept thinking about like this must have impacted so many people's idea of success.
Yeah.
Even though we learned that the people who had the success, you know, they didn't have it all.
Well, yeah, but I mean, you wouldn't get that sense from the shows. I mean, apart from, I mean, I think that the the thing with talking about Sammy Davis Jr.'s car accident is as as dark as we get with most of these things. I mean, they're really fluffy. They're really just a promotional opportunity as much as anything. I mean, Jerry Lewis in his solo one is on there promoting the Geisha Boy.
That's right.
Which I'm not going to talk about, but I watched it for this thing, right?
I believe it's pronounced Geisha Boy.
Talk about
yes, right. I will say, I mean, it is. I don't find Jerry funny, and so it's hard to get through. But Frank Tashlin directed it. There's some good staging in it. There's some. It's got colors. It's got and I will say this. There's a bunny that co-stars in that thing, and that fucking bunny is solid gold whenever it's on screen. Like
on Person to Person.
Yeah, there's a stuffed bunny in his person to person segment that he's using to promote it, but there's a real bunny called Harry in the thing, because he plays a sort of Jerry Lewis plays a low rent magician that goes on a sort of USO tour in Japan, and he some sort of arranged by the military sort of tour, and there's a lot of elaborate scheming so that he could bring his bunny with. That's part of his magic act. The bunny is a genius. I don't know what the bunny went on to do after this. I know that a lot of his performance was being bolstered by the the skill and craft of Frank Tashlin. But but I think that bunny did an amazing job in that movie.
Well, Gabe's fucking around, but honestly, the best Jerry Lewis films are the Tashlin films, and also of course Artisan Models.
Yeah,
one
I'm
of
not
the
fucking
last
around.
I'm
being totally.
No, I was
bunny
thinking in
thing.
terms of yeah. But no, Tashlin was a great director. He also did The Girl Can't Help It with Jane Mansfield.
Mansfield, yeah,
and great rock and roll performances from Little Richard and the like.
He definitely was a good craftsman, and he came out of Warner Brothers cartoons, right?
That's
he
right.
He was an animation guy.
He was an animator first.
He brought a lot of that poppy style to to those Technicolor 50s movies.
Absolutely.
And I think that he was a good director. I mean, even if a lot of that material doesn't really connect with me.
Right. Disorderly Orderly is one of my favorite Jerry Lewis movies, and that was a Tashlin film. Had a lot of great physical sight gags and physical.
But I think one thing relevant to the person to person of it all is that this movie, The Geisha Boy, he produced, right? Jerry Lewis was the producer of the movie, so he's introduced as performer and producer, and then of course soon after this he goes on to direct these movies, and then he's an unstoppable monster. Although I just want to take this this opportunity to apologize to Gary Lewis for being so hard on him. He's still out there. He's still plugging away. I can't speak for the Playboys, but at least for Gary, I'm sorry for being so harsh about your talents, and I'm sure you're a good man.
Yeah, the big moment to me that was actually very touching is the end of Groucho's. Like, he just kind of gives Groucho that moment. Is there anything you still wish for at this point? And then Groucho goes big with it, and I wish all the nations of the world. He gets into a thing about peace, and I was like, oh, I was not expecting it. It's very genuine and it's beautiful.
Have you ever seen that William F. Buckley firing line episode
Yes.
where Groucho was the guest? I think Groucho handled himself quite well. And I think for being a man of a limited education, he was a voracious reader and really, I think, tried for his entire life to compensate for the lack of schooling he had jumping into vaudeville as a child and everything.
And I do think he was an intelligent guy, you know, and just because he didn't have formal education. I mean, look, neither do I. But but like I think that that it's there's a lot. He seemed like an interesting guy who's interested in the world, and and also I love that part where he talks about composting and the earthworms and
when he wanted to be a farmer.
Yeah, and that great New York accent. Yeah, I got earthworms here.
And I take a shovel full of the earthworms and I spread them around the trees.
And also, including Dean Martin, by the way, because these person-to-person interviews are so short. Sammy did an amazing interview with Dick Cavett in either the 80s or the 90s, and it really got into, again, much like Groucho, feeling bad that he didn't have a formal education, but intellectually curious, really got into a lot of interesting moments of discussion with Cavett. And Dean Martin, there was a great interview that he did with some Australian journalist, a woman. And man, it was after Dean Paul had passed away, his son, who was part of that Dino, Desi, and Billy group. And, he was in the Naval or Air Force Reserves or Naval Reserves, was a pilot. Sadly, his jet, as he was flying it, impacted into a mountain and killed instantly. And obviously that is the tragedy of Martin's life and his final years, where he really was tough for him. But there's this great Australian interview with him that, despite being the private man that he was, I thought was reasonably candid about, kind of surviving that and where his life was at that moment. In that Katrina show, it doesn't surprise me that Jeannie Martin is quoted as saying, I never really knew the man in all the years of our marriage, which I found not surprising, but surprisingly candid to come from Jeannie Martin and stuff.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I do this. This show's an interesting show. I mean, it is fluff, but but it's almost interesting for the way that you can kind of you read between the lines and you look at what's being presented to you, and and maybe kind of suss out what's really going on there.
Well, and it was a successful show. It ran. Here's I'm glad you found this list, Gabe. I guess as the show was closing up, they did a thank you from of all the various people that had been on the show, and you see at the bottom the producers, including Murrow and Aaron and Zauner. But when things were starting to sour at CBS and between CBS and Ed Murrow, they took him off person to person, and Charles Collingwood actually. Murrow's student to Collingwood's mentor was Murrow in a lot of ways,
and he did the last 2 seasons of it, right?
Yep. And so I mean that's the thing. The show was so important that it did continue without Ed hosting it and everything. But it was man, I can't recommend enough the various biographies that have come out about Edward R. Murrow. Really, things did really sour for him at CBS. In fact, he kind of took a year off where he basically was fired, but they didn't want to actually publicly want to admit he was fired. Kennedy actually threw him a lifeline and put him in charge of the Voice of America, the propaganda arm of the United States, to kind of be there for the voice of through Europe. And be a pro-American, propaganda and just
but
about the Americans,
which is throwing him a lifeline, but it was a compromising position for him to be in. He was he's a journalist. He felt a journalist with integrity, but he was also a patriotic guy who wanted to do to like serve the government, and but those things don't go together that well,
Right.
And there came a point where. One of the shows that he had done was I think it's called Harvest of Shame or
That's right.
something, right? And it was about migrant labor, in the U.S. and kind of exposing. It ran on Thanksgiving. It's basically like saying, hey, look, everybody's sitting around and and enjoying their meals, but these are the people who are out there, making sure that food can get to your table, and they don't get to live the same kind of life you do.
Yes.
And which is like a bold thing for for the time, certainly for television. But after he was in government, the BBC wanted to run it, and Murrow was put in the position of having to reach out to a guy at the BBC who he had worked with during the war and go, hey, we don't want you to run this because we don't want America to look bad. His own show. It's kind of tragic. And the BBC ran it anyway. They were like,
yes, they did.
Too bad,
Hey,
and
my grade school showed it to us as a school film. When we were like in junior high, to kind of because the message was still, and obviously
Sure.
the migrant situation was still a terrible thing. So no, it is. It's a very powerful documentary. And you're right. That's why I wanted to talk about it too. It's the other side of Murrow in terms of person to person. Like you said, it's the cheesy glamour show that he really didn't like, but this is what he was famous for.
Yeah, absolutely.
So,
all right, cool. We did it.
There you go. Great man, great American, and honestly, again, I think a complicated man. And I can't recommend enough. My personal favorite account, and it goes till the end of his life, is the Murrow Boys, that looks at all the CBS correspondents from World War II and how they got there, what happened to their careers afterwards. And as someone who's been through the broadcast ringer myself, I can relate to don't feel bad for me. I mean, everything's fine. But I mean, no, when they're done with you, they're done with you, and that's fine. That's okay.
A lot of industries are like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So no, but it's a tremendous book, and even Bob Edwards, the old NPR morning edition anchor, did a decent biography of Murrow. I mean, I read it and I'm like, yeah, I know all this stuff. Ann Sperber back in the day wrote a wonderful dictionary-sized book about Murrow, and I think is incredibly thorough and a great accounting of his life. So there are great books out there to find of Edward R. Murrow's life.
Yeah, super interesting figure, important, and but also just kind of not in maybe not exactly in the ways that if you know who he is, only these couple of bullet points about him, and I think that the real guy and the real stuff is more interesting than that.
Agreed. Any final thoughts, gentlemen? Jeff, Ian?
No, we nailed it.
Yeah,
Great.
You did a great job.
Okay, good. All right,
Next-
we're geniuses. Okay, now go. What are we doing next week, John?
Yeah, next time we're going to look at a very interesting show that, once again, much like some of Murrow's shows, started as a radio show, became an early television show, kind of a precursor to Outer Limits and Twilight Zone. It was called Lights Out. It was created by Willis Cooper, great Chicago inventive radio writer and eventually television writer as well. Arch Obler was another great man behind the show. But this is a very impactful, I guess you can call it a horror show, but it was really, they were suspenseful shows.
Yeah, a suspense sort of show. But yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But we'll we'll talk about the particular episodes we'll look at and get into that next week.
So thanks a lot, and we'll talk to you on the next Kinescope. Bye-bye, everybody.
Our report details how advertising through television transforms strangers to your product into acquaintances, and acquaintances into friends, and friends into customers. You could almost say, as a result, that television puts into every living room